It was supposed to be a routine flight, just a few hours in the sky, and then home. Emily Carter, a 26-year-old nurse fresh off a grueling hospital shift, had taken her seat by the window in row 14, hoping for a few hours of rest. With her headphones in and a blanket tucked around her legs, she leaned back, eyes closed, trying to detach from the world she had just left behind. The whir of the engines was oddly soothing. For the first hour, everything was normal. Then came the sudden turbulence. The plane jolted, not violently, but enough to wake Emily and draw murmurs of concern from other passengers. The fasten seatbelt sign flashed on. A few heads turned toward the cockpit. Something felt off, though no announcement came. Minutes passed. Whispers grew louder. The flight attendants, usually composed and cheerful, now wore strained expressions. Suddenly, a voice crackled over the intercom, shaky and uncertain. It was the co-pilot, announcing that the captain had experienced a medical emergency. The words hung heavy in the air. Gasps echoed through the cabin. Some passengers stood up in panic, others froze. Emily's heart skipped a beat. She tossed off her blanket and stood, instantly alert. Her nurse's instincts kicked in. "I'm a nurse," she called out, already making her way up the aisle. Flight attendants guided her toward the cockpit, their faces pale. Inside, she found the captain slumped in his seat, unconscious, beads of sweat glistening on his forehead. His breathing was shallow, erratic. A quick check of his vitals confirmed what Emily feared, a cardiac episode. He needed immediate intervention. Her hands moved with practiced speed. She requested a first aid kit and asked the attendants to find the onboard defibrillator. The cramped space, the pressure of the moment, and the thousand eyes watching, none of it fazed her. All that mattered was stabilizing the pilot. She cleared his airway, adjusted his position, and began administering CPR. When the AED arrived, she applied it without hesitation, instructing the crew with calm, clear authority. The co-pilot, still in control, kept the plane steady as best as he could, frequently glancing over at Emily. The passengers, though still anxious, were visibly calmed by her presence. Her voice, soothing but firm, echoed down the aisles when she gave instructions to the crew. "Stay calm," she told them. "We're going to be okay." 20 long minutes passed as she worked to stabilize the captain's condition. It was physically and emotionally draining, but she never once wavered. The co-pilot, with ground control's assistance, arranged for an emergency landing at the nearest airport. As the plane descended, Emily stayed by the pilot's side, monitoring his vitals, adjusting his breathing, keeping his heart stable. When the wheels finally touched the runway, applause broke out, not the usual clapping from a smooth landing, but a heartfelt, tear-filled ovation from passengers who had just witnessed something extraordinary. Emergency crews rushed on board, and Emily calmly briefed them before stepping back, covered in sweat, her scrubs wrinkled, her face flushed from the effort. She hadn't come looking for praise. She only did what her heart, and her training, told her was right. As the cabin remained tense and the reality of the situation sank in, Emily didn't stop at treating the pilot. She knew that in moments like this, leadership didn't come from rank, it came from calm, compassionate action. The co-pilot, a younger man perhaps flying solo for the first time in an emergency, looked visibly shaken. His voice had cracked on the intercom earlier, and now his hands trembled slightly as he tried to maintain altitude and contact ground control. Emily noticed his distress immediately. Though she had no training in aviation, she knew what panic looked like, and how destructive it could be in a high-pressure moment. She stepped into the narrow space behind the cockpit door, speaking to him gently but firmly. "You've got this," she said. "Take a breath. I'm not going anywhere, and you're not alone." The words were simple, but her tone, filled with warmth and certainty, helped ground him. He nodded, eyes flickering between his instruments and the window, his breath slowly evening out. Emily stood nearby, giving him enough space to focus, yet close enough to let him know she was right there. Her presence alone seemed to reset the emotional temperature in the cockpit. Meanwhile, in the cabin, a different kind of tension was building. Passengers were whispering, some on the verge of tears, others trying to get cell signals to reach loved ones. One woman clutched her toddler close, rocking back and forth. An older man with a heart condition was showing signs of distress. Flight attendants were doing their best, but the situation was spiraling toward chaos. That's when Emily, without hesitation, stepped out again and into the aisle. She raised her voice, not to shout, but to speak with authority and kindness. "I want everyone to know that we're okay. The pilot is receiving medical care, and the co-pilot is in control. We're making an emergency landing and emergency services are already waiting. You are safe. Please stay calm and remain seated." Her words, spoken with such clarity and care, rippled through the cabin like a warm wave. People who had been trembling began to breathe more steadily. A young boy stopped crying and clung to his mother, who gave Emily a tearful nod of gratitude. A flight attendant whispered, "Thank you," as she walked by, continuing to check seatbelts and reassure the passengers. Emily didn't sit back down. She stayed on her feet, moving aisle to aisle, offering quiet words to those who looked especially nervous. She crouched next to the older man in distress, took his pulse, and spoke to him about his grandchildren to distract him. She gave a small bottle of water to a woman who looked like she might faint. It wasn't just medical care, it was human care. Her empathy transformed a terrifying moment into something manageable. In the cockpit, the co-pilot, now visibly more composed, made another announcement, this time steadier, more confident. "We're beginning our descent," he said. "Thanks to our onboard nurse, everyone is safe." Emily returned to the cockpit once more, sharing a glance with him that needed no words. Together, they continued guiding the aircraft down, supported by flight staff who had found renewed strength in her presence. The moment the plane landed safely, emergency personnel boarded swiftly, taking over the care of the pilot and ensuring every passenger was unharmed. But before most people had even unbuckled their seatbelts, phones were already out. What had just unfolded in that aircraft was nothing short of remarkable, and the passengers knew they had witnessed something that needed to be shared with the world. Videos began surfacing online almost immediately, clips showing the young nurse, Emily, giving calm instructions, crouching beside the unconscious pilot and speaking with gentle confidence to a tearful child or an elderly passenger. By the time Emily stepped off the plane, exhausted and unaware of the attention she had drawn, the first video had already hit 1 million views. A passenger who worked as a travel vlogger had posted a heartfelt story about the nurse who became the heart of Flight 372. The post included a shaky but powerful video of Emily guiding a flight attendant, her tone steady and compassionate even as turbulence shook the cabin. Another clip featured her voice over the intercom, assuring passengers with words that felt more comforting than any safety manual ever could. News outlets picked up the story rapidly. Headlines began to circulate, "Nurse turns hero mid-air, Angel in Scrubs saves flight," and "Compassion at 30,000 feet." Hashtags like #NurseEmily, #SkyAngel, and #Heart in the Air began trending. Strangers across the globe watched those videos, some through tears, others with awe. Comment sections filled with admiration, people praised her bravery, her kindness, her humility. Parents wrote that they showed their children the clips to teach them what real courage looks like. Healthcare workers left comments saying how proud they were to see one of their own honored in such a way. Passengers from the flight began to share personal testimonials. A young mother recounted how Emily held her baby for a moment so she could drink some water. A teenage girl posted about how Emily had knelt beside her and held her hand during the descent. An older man wrote that he'd never felt such peace in a moment of fear, and that it was all because of the nurse who looked at him like a granddaughter would. Emily, meanwhile, had turned her phone off during the flight and left it in her bag. By the time she turned it back on in the terminal, she was met with an avalanche of missed calls, messages, and notifications. Her inbox overflowed. Local news stations had already reached out for interviews. Strangers had found her hospital and sent bouquets of flowers. Her name was being tagged in thousands of posts. Her quiet act of kindness, something she had done simply because it was needed, had become a symbol of hope and humanity in an increasingly chaotic world. In one widely shared clip, a passenger had zoomed in on Emily as she gently comforted a crying elderly woman, brushing hair from the woman's face and whispering something softly. The clip was captioned, "This is what love looks like in action." Millions liked and shared the post. Schools began discussing her story in classrooms. A few artists even sketched portraits of her in scrubs with angel wings, posting them with captions that read, "Real hero." Journalists compared her to historic figures who had stepped up in crisis. Editorials praised not just her skill, but the warmth she carried in every word and every touch. Her selflessness resonated far beyond the boundaries of one flight or one emergency. It touched something deeper in people's hearts. The next day began quietly for Emily. She had barely slept after returning home from the airport, emotionally drained yet still trying to grasp the enormity of what had happened. Her phone, now fully charged and buzzing with constant notifications, continued to light up with messages from strangers, reporters, and even old high school classmates who hadn't spoken to her in years. She scrolled through countless posts praising her bravery, still not fully comprehending why the world was making such a big deal out of what she believed was simply the right thing to do. Around mid-afternoon, just as she finished making a cup of tea in her modest kitchen, her phone rang with a number she didn't recognize. Expecting it to be another reporter, she answered cautiously. But what she heard next nearly made her drop the phone. A warm but official voice greeted her, identifying himself as a senior staff member from the office of the president. For a moment, she thought it was a prank. That is, until the voice said, "Please hold for President T." Her heart skipped a beat. Then came the familiar voice, confident, direct, yet unexpectedly kind. President T thanked her personally, not just as a leader, but as a fellow human being. He spoke about how deeply moved he and the nation were by her actions aboard Flight 372. "Emily," he said, "you showed the kind of bravery that doesn't just save lives, it inspires them. In a world that's too often hardened by conflict and division, your compassion broke through. You reminded us all of what kindness truly looks like." Emily barely managed a response, overwhelmed by emotion. She had never imagined speaking to a president, let alone receiving such heartfelt praise. Her voice trembled as she said thank you, still unsure how to respond to the surreal moment unfolding in her small kitchen. President T then extended a personal invitation. He wanted her to come to the presidential residence as an honored guest. A formal recognition ceremony was being arranged, not just to celebrate her heroism, but to hold her up as a symbol of the very best qualities a citizen could embody: selflessness, calm under pressure, and unwavering kindness. He explained that the country needed more stories like hers, ones that inspired unity, hope, and humanity. Her presence would remind the world that heroism wasn't always loud or armored, it could come in scrubs, with a soothing voice and a steady hand. The call ended with warm congratulations and details about her upcoming visit, which would include meeting other dignitaries and sharing her experience with the nation through a televised interview. Moments later, a presidential aide followed up with flight details, a driver for her airport transport, and instructions for her stay. As the call ended and Emily sat in stunned silence, her phone buzzed again, this time from news outlets reporting that the president had publicly acknowledged her actions in a morning address, calling her a quiet force of courage and a reminder that the greatest strength is often found in acts of compassion. The grand hall of the presidential residence was filled with dignitaries, government officials, members of the press, and everyday citizens who had been invited to witness the ceremony. Banners reading, "Celebrating Courage," and "Honoring Compassion," hung elegantly around the marble-clad room. Cameras flashed and whispered conversations floated through the air as everyone waited in anticipation. The spotlight was not on a decorated soldier or a political figure, it was on a young, soft-spoken nurse who had simply followed her instinct to help others in a time of need. Emily stood at the center of it all, a picture of humility in her modest navy dress, her hair neatly tied back, and a small presidential medal resting on her chest. Despite the applause, the fanfare, and the eyes of the nation fixed on her, she didn't look proud or boastful. She looked reflective. Grateful. Maybe even a little overwhelmed. When it came time for her to speak, a hush fell over the room. She stepped up to the podium with calm resolve. Her hands rested gently on either side of the microphone as she looked out at. Her speech at the ceremony was brief, heartfelt, and deeply humble. But the impact of her words, paired with the raw emotion captured in videos of the flight, echoed far beyond the walls of the presidential residence. In the hours that followed the broadcast, people across the globe began reacting, not with mere admiration, but with action. Social media erupted, not just with hashtags in her name, but with a growing movement inspired by her selflessness. It started with simple gestures, strangers paying for someone else's coffee, people writing thank you notes to healthcare workers, students volunteering at local shelters, and neighbors checking in on the elderly. By the end of that week, a grassroots campaign titled The Emily Effect began trending in multiple countries. It was launched by a group of travelers who had been on the same flight, aiming to spread the same kindness they experienced firsthand. The campaign encouraged people to perform one deliberate act of compassion each day, whether helping someone carry groceries, offering a kind word to a stranger, or simply choosing patience over anger. What made the campaign unique was its organic nature. There was no corporate backing, no advertising blitz, just people, inspired by one young nurse's actions, choosing to be better for each other. Schools began incorporating her story into lesson plans about empathy and courage. Teachers across continents used her example to show students that real heroes don't always wear capes, they wear compassion. Children in classrooms from Tokyo to Toronto started kindness journals, tracking their daily good deeds, many proudly posting photos of handmade posters quoting Emily's words from the ceremony. Kindness isn't something rare, it's part of who we are. Non-profit organizations joined the movement, organizing global kindness days, where volunteers came together to clean parks, serve meals, and distribute care packages. In hospitals and clinics, nurses felt a renewed sense of pride, as Emily's story reminded the world of the quiet, consistent care they provided each day. A hospital in South Africa named a new wing in her honor. A school in Brazil painted a mural of her helping passengers with the phrase, "One heart can calm the storm." News outlets continued to follow the ripple effects of her influence. Evening broadcasts showed clips of people in India planting trees in her name, of fire departments in the United States donating supplies to struggling communities, of refugees being welcomed with homemade meals by kind strangers in Europe. Everywhere, people were choosing empathy. And each of these acts, no matter how small, became a part of the larger wave her story had started. Artists created tributes in music, poetry, and painting. A renowned filmmaker announced plans to produce a documentary about the global movement her story had ignited. International leaders began referencing her in speeches, not as a fleeting moment of fame, but as an enduring example of how individual goodness can inspire collective change. Social media was no longer just a platform for news, it had become a platform for kindness. People tagged each other in posts saying, "What would Emily do?" or simply, "Kindness first."